Thanks for clicking. China's real estate crisis continued to intensify this week as mortgage boycotts spread across a growing number of Chinese cities, with some starting to question whether or not China's real estate crisis is indeed China's Lehman moment. President Xi Jinping is getting increasingly worried about the state of China's real estate sector. Indeed, the mortgage boycott is not only picking up speed among homebuyers, but also suppliers to these real estate developers that have gone unpaid, and as such announced this week that they would also be boycotting their payments on loans to Chinese banks.
We'll pay.
So what I want to do today is skip over Evergrande.
Sounds good.
And instead focus on this mortgage boycott in China, looking at how far it's spread and what steps China is taking to stop it. This boycott is a symptom of China's ongoing real estate crisis, which started last year and shows no signs of slowing. We'll obviously continue to have updates out on this real estate crisis in China on this channel every Friday. If you want to get those updates, make sure you click like and subscribe. But for now, let's get into these boycotts. As we discussed last week, Chinese homebuyers have begun to boycott making their mortgage payments on projects to which they have paid for but have yet to be completed. Unlike here in the West, in the US, and in Canada, Chinese homebuyers have to make the mortgage payments on their homes even though those homes are not yet complete.
You're so lucky. You don't know how good you got it.
Until now, that is, as homebuyers are refusing to pay. The protest started a few weeks ago, and it started with 22 cities across 35 projects, and Chinese homebuyers refusing to make their mortgage payments. But the protests have been spreading online, and as of the recording of this video, have spread to 301 projects across 91 cities. The total value of the mortgages being boycotted is about 2 trillion won, or about $296 billion. This is out of a mortgage market worth about 38 trillion won, or about $5.6 trillion in total. So it's a relatively small portion at $296 billion that has been boycotted.
I spend that much on aftershave.
But it's only been 2 weeks, and the real worry is as this boycott spreads, as they get more and more followers, there's going to be more and more pressure put on the banks, which, as we'll see, Beijing and the People's Bank of China are getting more and more concerned about. And it's not just the Chinese homebuyers that are expressing their discontent with these real estate developers. Suppliers to these developers have also decided to stop making their payments. Last year we talked about the suppliers of these real estate developers going bankrupt as they went continually unpaid. And obviously their frustration is boiling over, and they are starting to protest in much the same manner as the homebuyers, taking out their frustrations on the banks. So what does Beijing think of all this?
That's enough.
Worries over the continual non-payment of these mortgages sparked the attention of the People's Bank of China, the PBOC, which increased its daily cash injections into the banking system for the first time since June. Late last week, Chinese authorities summoned the big banks for an emergency meeting to discuss the impact on the economy and the housing market. While no immediate action has yet to be taken by authorities, there is a real push to allow for a grace period on the part of these Chinese homebuyers. Allow them to not make their payments, but make it okay that they're not making those payments.
Homebuyers would be allowed to stop making the payments without any penalty, without it hurting their credit scores.
So essentially, they would be able to continue to not make their payments, but it wouldn't be a hit against their credit score, and it wouldn't show up as a loss on the books of the banks. The plan on the grace period has yet to be finalized and would still have to be approved by the authorities, but it's looking like that is the most viable option going forward.
Very generous of you.
With that said, there is a real worry on this grace period plan that it could spark further protest from homebuyers who have already had their projects completed, have moved in, but have seen the value of their homes drop significantly over the past few years, over the past few months, especially with the Chinese real estate crisis continuing to unfold. With that said, in addition to the grace period being considered, Chinese banks have been urged by the PBOC, by authorities, to get lending to these real estate developers so they can finish these projects. However, Chinese banks are not always immediately receptive to Beijing's encouragement. If you'll remember, throughout the zero COVID lockdowns, China was encouraging banks to lend, and they had to go back a few times to get them to actually get money into the economy, to get lending to the consumers. So these banks have been hesitant to lend to these real estate developers due to continual defaults over the past few years, but China is encouraging them to lend nonetheless.
I don't care what it costs you.
From all accounts, it looks like we are in the very early stages of this mortgage boycott, which is continuing to spread, and Beijing has yet to come up with a viable plan to fix it, to get these mortgage boycotts to stop. And this could be a real problem for China's banking sector, as we saw with how quickly the PBOC moved to inject cash into the system. Chinese banks already have a problem with real estate developers not paying their debts, and now they're adding on homebuyers not paying their debts as well. So this could put a lot of stress on Chinese banks. If nobody's paying their bills, then that causes a real problem with the banking sector, which could cause a big problem for China's economy as a whole. As we saw in 2008, a lack of credit can cause financial havoc in an economy, and Beijing is going to want to get its arms wrapped around this mortgage boycott sooner rather than later. We'll obviously have updates out on this mortgage boycott in China and how Beijing deals with it going forward. If you want to get those updates, make sure you click like and subscribe, and thanks so much for watching.